In today's market in 2021, there's a lot of talk about ESG, and there's also been the emergence of impact investing as an asset class. And in order to make better sense of these two trends, what might be worth our while is to look back a bit and look at some of the theories that have been developed over the past years about assessing the development impact of projects, including private equity investments. Coming up. What we're going to be doing in this video is assessing the impact of an investment project, so including a private equity investment project, on society as a whole. And to do that, we will take a project-oriented approach where we look at the economics of a project and then try to assess the return of the project both to the private investors or financiers as well as the wider return to society as a whole. The approach we are therefore going to take is going to be a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach, in which we're going to look at the project and then look at its ramifications to the wider society. So you might think of it as kind of throwing a rock into a lake and then watch the ripples go further and further out. And that's a little bit about how you can think about development impacts. How do we therefore work out the societal impact of any particular project? Well, the way we do that is by considering different groups of stakeholders. So what we're looking at is different groups of people, such as groups of customers or groups of employees. So it's all centered around groups and the benefits that may accrue to the different groups who are parties to an investment project. What we are going to be doing in the analysis is doing a kind of cost-benefit analysis for all the various groups of the investments we make in the project, the return that project will deliver to us, and the value of that return. So in the case of an investor, the return would be a profit. In the case of, for example, the wider community, the return might be in better environmental investments, and so on and so forth. In the literature of economics, these benefits, which do not accrue to the financiers of the project, are referred to as externalities and sometimes as side effects. So they can be thought of as the unintended consequences of an investment to the wider community beyond the parameters of that particular project. So when thinking of analysing the projects, one of the things we have to decide upon is what would be the unit of measurement. Because, for example, if somebody builds a factory and then improves the environment because they clean up the air, that means that people are going to breathe cleaner air. How do you quantify breathing cleaner air? So in order for everything to be comparable, we need to be in a position where we can measure all these different social benefits that a project may develop. And we do this in monetary terms, because that's the way that we can all agree upon the value of all these different inputs and externalities. When it comes to measuring these inputs, we often will find the situation where some of them may be easily measured. For example, what would be the salary increase of an employee? Others may be much more difficult to measure, such as, for example, what is the value of the upgrading of the image of a town where we build a new factory? Or what is the value of the river being cleaner? So some things may be possible to measure and easy and cost effective to measure. Some things may be possible to measure, but it's just too expensive to measure them. It's just not worth my while. And some other things may be unmeasurable. And so when we do a proper analysis of externalities, we have to recognize these three different categories in order for our analysis to be credible and realistic. So what is going to be our primary method of measurement? Well, the primary method of measurement is going to be using an Excel spreadsheet. To put it very simply, we're going to plug in the numbers, estimate the returns to the different stakeholders, and then measure the overall return of the project, both to the project financiers as well as to the wider society. So the methodology is going to be based upon a kind of financial model. So let's start by quickly going through who are the major stakeholders who have an interest in any particular private equity project that would have a wider development impact. Well, we've got the financiers, so the investors in the project, which would be the equity investors and possibly also the debt investors. And then beyond that, we have employees who are also much closer to the company because they're working in the company. And then beyond that, we have customers, suppliers, competitors, potential new entrants, producers of complementary products, neighbours, so the immediate environment around, for example, the factory, and the wider society beyond that. So we have a set of about 10 different stakeholders who we all have to take into consideration when we are thinking of calculating externalities. So let's consider employees as our first group of stakeholders, and I'm going to look at my notes from time to time, if you don't mind. So how will project employees benefit over and above normal wages? Well, one would be the increased wages, so that if this project allows for them to obtain salaries that they would not otherwise obtain, that would be a benefit. And the second main benefit would be the benefit of the worker to training. So if somebody invests in workers' trainings. Now we have to make a distinction there, because some training can be just for productivity, to make the workers work better within the factory, and the benefit of that goes to the investors. And a second part of the training, which would be to improve the general skills of the worker and to make them more marketable in other jobs. And that part of the training would be an enhanced benefit of the worker rather than the productivity training. The group of customers is another group of stakeholders. So what could be the benefits to customers of a new project coming on stream? One could be that this new project represents a new good or service for the customer. So it's something for which there was pent-up demand and which satisfied a need of the customer. The second thing, it could be that it could be a better quality product. So raising the game of the sector by improving the product quality. And thirdly, generally increasing the supply of the product on the market. And so that would be the third benefit. And then what we can do is we can assess the general benefit to the wider society or to the wider customers by making use of supply and demand curves to estimate the synergy of a new product coming into the market. Producers of complementary products may also be positively impacted by a new project. An example of that would be that if the project is to build a new motorway, this would have a knock-on effect to gasoline stations or to motorway restrooms and bars along the motorway. This is an example of how complementary products could benefit. And sometimes the project might have a vertical integration where the investor in the project may build the gasoline stations themselves, but maybe not if this could be done more effectively and more profitably with someone else who better understands that particular segment. Another group that will benefit from the project would be suppliers. And this would be by increased demand for their goods. So suppliers would be able to enjoy a higher demand for their goods. And the other thing that may happen is a network effect from new suppliers coming into the market, as well as potentially the customer improving the supply chain or the network of suppliers through technical assistance and through a network of new suppliers coming on stream. If we take the example of somewhere like Italy, you'll see that certain sectors like ceramics or silk, there are clusters of excellence. And this is because the customers and suppliers are located close to each other, and that creates benefits and synergies. Competitors and new entrants are another area that may benefit. Now, this may be counterintuitive a little bit because some competitors may suffer as a result of somebody else coming into the market, but it also may have the effect of helping competitors to raise their game through the demonstration effect of a quality new project, as well as encouraging new entrants to come into the market, and therefore generally having the effect of stimulating the market in a way that everybody wins. In other words, that the cake sort of gets bigger for everybody. Another group we can consider is so-called neighbours. Now, what do we mean by neighbours? Neighbours would be something like the local community. So an example of a neighbour benefiting from a new investment might be you build a new factory. In order to have that factory work efficiently, you build a couple of side roads from the factory to the main road, and these roads can then be used by the local community, and it improves their transportation options. Or another example might be that the factory decides to build a school for the children of the employees in order to make it easier for them to be more productive employees. And so these are some of the examples of the immediate community that could benefit from a new investment. The rest of society, that refers to everybody else apart from the groups that I've just described, so the wider population. And how does the rest of society benefit? Well, it would generally be through taxes. The project would generate a profit, and this could be profit taxes or sales taxes. It might be import duties paid on imports of goods, and other types of tariffs. And these can easily be quantified, and that would represent a general benefit to the wider society. So what we've seen is that we have taken an approach that's very much project oriented or bottom up, because what we do is we look at a project and then look at the effects of the project working our way outwards from the center of the project. So very much a bottom up approach. But we can also complement that with a top down perspective. And the two essential elements from a top-down point of view is, number one, the demonstration effect. If I build a shining new factory in an emerging market, that can have a so-called demonstration effect because people see it's possible, competitors raise their game, suppliers see that there's a better opportunity for them. And so there's a wide demonstration effect which can send ripples throughout the society. That's one. The second one might be an improvement in policy. So, for example, if I'm building a new power plant, it may stimulate the government to improve their laws on power contracts. So that this investment may stimulate policy upgrades or more clarity in country policy, and that will benefit everybody in that sector. Now, before we go on to our worked example in which we're going to make all this more concrete, I wanted to relate this approach, which has been around for many years, with the current debate in 2021 about impact investment and ESG. So how does this differ? How do we link this to impact investment and ESG? Well, effectively, any project which has external benefits to other stakeholders and to wider society has a positive impact. Now, what the differences between impact investment is that this approach here quantifies every impact in monetary terms, and it does that so that we have a common measure of value. Let's compare that to an impact investment, because in an impact investment, the thinking that has been developed in recent years is that we should have non-financial metrics. So we make an investment, and so, for example, we invest in a project in an African village, and one thing we do is we have a profitable project, and the second thing is we're looking to have an impact like increase the literacy of the children of that village, which is obviously a noble cause. But impact investors try to measure that, for example, by how many children improve their literacy, rather than trying to assign a monetary value to that. And that is very good, and it's an alternative, but it does have the weakness that you may not be able to agree on that value. Let's take an example of that. So let's say one of my measures is to improve the literacy rate of African children. Now, that may have different value to different stakeholders. So if I'm the impact investor or the NGO from the West who has a mission to improve the lives of this African village, I'm going to love that. It's going to be very important for me to improve the literacy rate of those children. But let's say I'm a village elder from the local village, and I might say, well, I don't assign the same value to that, because if the average farmer in my village has 10 children, it's enough for 2 or 3 of them to learn to read and write, and they can go off and become educated. But we need the labour force of the remaining 6 or 7 to work the fields, so there's no point in them being educated. Or the local politician might say, well, we don't want to exaggerate the budget on children's education because I'd actually like to build a dam down the road. So you may have a different value attributed to children's education between the NGO, the Western NGO, the village elder, and the local politician. And so you may have a disagreement on the value of that impact. And then but the method that we use here, because we assign a monetary value to that, we don't have that particular problem. The second issue we have in impact investment is the attribution problem. So we have a project that increases the literacy rate of the children in that village, but simultaneously another NGO comes on with a teacher who goes around teaching the children. So when we measure the amount of children who've improved their literacy, we're not sure if it comes from our project or from the other competing project or the other complementary project. And so we have a difficulty in attributing the effect of our project onto the outcomes. And that's the problem you may have with impact investment, which many NGOs struggle with in developmental products. And we have that to some extent with our approach in this case, but it's less of a problem because we can use more rigorous methods of measurement. Let me now turn to the worked example that I'm showing you here on screen. So it's going to appear on screen. And please forgive me if I look at my computer, so I'm going to be looking off to my left from time to time. So let's look at this. Let's look at this project. So what we see in the top rows is a classic investment project. You see, we've got an investment of 700,000. Let's say it's a widget factory. So we invest 700,000 in year 1, and in year 7, our project is over. We sell the factory for scrap, and we get 100,000 back. So let's say that's a kind of simplification. So we see the capital investment item 4 is 700,000 at the beginning, and I get back 100,000 at the end. So what happens over the years? Well, I produce these goods, and so I've got annual revenues of $1 million a year, which is A1. Against that, I've got my wage costs, which is item 2 of $500,000 a year. I've got my wages paid to my material inputs rather of $300,000 a year, and that generates a profit of $200,000. I pay tax of $40,000 on that profit, and that gets me a net profit of $160,000. Except in year 7, I add back the $100,000 from selling off the machinery. So if you look at the cash flow, which is row number 7, A7. You can calculate the IRR of that cash flow from minus 700,000 through the positive cash flows, and that gets you a financial rate of return of 11.9%. So all very well and simple, which is a fairly basic project calculation. Now let's see the calculation of the wider externalities. So firstly, we start with B, employees. So the employees are going to get a better wage because they're going to be paid $1,000 a month instead of $950. And the effect of that is going to be a positive $25,000 a year. In addition, they're going to receive a certain amount of training budget, which is $50 a year, of which half is for their own skills and half is just to make them more productive. So we're going to count the half, which is their own skills. That's $25 a year, which gets me $12,500. And that's my externalities to the employees. Then we've got the consumer surplus. So we use economic theory and we create some demand curves, and we calculate the amount of the stimulation of the market, which is for the benefit of the wider society, of the wider customers. So the benefit for everybody, which we calculate to be 26,000. And D, we also use the same economic technique to work out the profits of producers of complementary goods who are stimulated to produce more by the main projects. We also equate the profits of suppliers because the market has expanded both in size and quality, and that improves the profits of the suppliers. And finally, competitors and new entrants, we also have a positive effect because competitors raise their game, new entrants stimulate the market, but we've decided that in this case it's not worth measuring because there's too many assumptions to be made. Then we get to G, to neighbours. So firstly, we've got a negative effect of additional pollution. This factory is going to be making some emissions, and so the pollution is going to be in the air, and that's going to lead to some people staying at home and be sick a bit more, and we can estimate the cost of that. And then we've got on the positive side some new infrastructure where the factory has built a slip road which people can use, and we can make some assumptions about how much people will be prepared to pay as a road toll in order to use that road, and we can quantify that amount. Finally, we get to H, the rest of society, and in this case it's more to do with taxes, and so we've got the positive effect of profit taxes being paid, of sales taxes, of input tariffs. We've got a negative effect on the higher price of the products, but everything else, and of the subsidies, we get a 40,000 subsidy from the government in order to encourage the factory to set up, but everything else is positive. I add it all up, and I get a return for society of 233,000 in year 2, and in the subsequent years. And I repeat my calculation, and I get an economic rate of return, ERR, of 25.8%. So what this does, I can precisely quantify the wider benefits to society. And that is important because it shows that my project can be good. And another thing it can show is I could look at the different inputs and say, well, look, how can I make this even better? So for example, we've got this pollution. Maybe what I could do is make an investment in some kind of filter on my chimney and reduce those pollution effects and see if it still produces the profit that I need to make the project go ahead. So quantifying this in a dynamic financial model is extremely beneficial. So I hope you found this exercise of interest, particularly in the current times where there's a lot of talk about ESG and impact. And I think what this video helps to do is that it is possible to apply financial rigor, not just in the analysis of a specific project, but also in the measurement of its wider good to society, which is important.